My God, look at that wretched thing she is wearing. Did you seriously come to your own husband's funeral dressed like a maid on her day off?" Jessica Thorne's voice cut through the solemn, heavy silence of the St. Jude Cathedral like a jagged shard of glass. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a discreet comment shared between friends. It was a proclamation, sharp and venomous, designed to echo off the high vaulted ceilings and reach every ear in the congregation. It is embarrassing, truly. You look like a pauper who got lost on the way to a soup kitchen. Every head in the front 3 rows turned. The air in the church, already thick with the scent of lilies and rain-dampened wool, seemed to freeze. I stood there clutching my handbag with trembling fingers, my eyes fixed on the mahogany casket that held the love of my life, Arthur. I was Alara Vance, 68 years old, a widow of less than 4 days, and I was being publicly flayed by my daughter-in-law. The dress I wore was a simple, structureless black garment. To the untrained eye, specifically the eyes of someone like Jessica, who worshipped logos rather than craftsmanship, it looked plain, drab, perhaps even cheap. What she did not know, and what she was incapable of understanding, was that the fabric was a rare vicuña wool blend, woven by a master tailor in Milan, and the buttons were hand-carved jet. It was a garment of quiet mourning, chosen for its dignity, not its price tag. But to Jessica, dignity was a foreign concept unless it came with a neon sign announcing its market value. "Jessica, please, not here, Daniel," my son whispered. His voice was a thin, fragile thing, cracking under the weight of his grief and his wife's audacity. He looked at me with apologetic eyes, eyes that were rimmed with red, begging me silently to forgive her, to ignore her, to just let it pass as I always did. But Jessica had found her stage, and she was not about to exit. "No, Daniel, someone has to say it. I work in high-end fashion. I know quality. I know style. And this?" She pointed a manicured finger, capped with a gaudy acrylic nail, directly at my chest. "This is a clearance rack disaster. Your mother has absolutely zero class. It is disrespectful to your father's memory." Arthur was a man of pride. He must be rolling over in that box seeing his widow looking like a bag lady. Her friends, a gaggle of women named Chloe and Brittany, who worked with her at the boutique, nodded in unison like bobblehead dolls on a dashboard. They covered their mouths, giggling behind their hands, their whispers sounding like the hissing of snakes in the quiet sanctuary. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot, scalding against my cold skin, but it was not a tear of sorrow, not anymore. Sorrow had been my companion for the last week as I watched Arthur fade away in the hospice wing, holding his hand until the very end. This tear was different. This was rage, pure, molten rage. For 30 years, Arthur and I had built an empire from nothing. We owned Vance and Sterling, the very luxury retail conglomerate that employed Jessica as a junior sales associate. We owned the building this church stood on. We owned the mortgage on the overpriced condo Jessica and Daniel lived in, though they did not know it because the bank managed it through a shell company. I took a deep breath. Inhaling the incense and the betrayal, I looked at Jessica, really looked at her. She was wearing a dress that was too tight, too short, and emblazoned with a designer logo so large it could be seen from space. She thought she looked wealthy. I knew she looked desperate. "Poor Alara," Jessica continued, pitching her voice to a sympathetic whine that grated on my nerves. "It must be so hard for her. I guess when you have no retirement savings and you live in that tiny, sad apartment, fashion isn't a priority, but still, have some self-respect." The murmur of the crowd grew. I could hear the fragments of sentences floating around me. Is it true? Is she really that broke? Poor Daniel, having to support her. That dress is awful. I remained silent. I kept my head bowed, not in shame, but in calculation. Arthur had always told me that I was too soft. "Alara, my love," he would say, stroking my hair as we sat on the terrace of our penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. You have a heart of gold, but the world is made of iron. You have to be harder. Standing there next to his coffin, I realized he was right. I had played the role of the sweet, unassuming, lower-middle-class grandmother for too long. I had driven a 2014 Honda Civic to maintain the illusion. I had lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood, while our real estate portfolio grew into the hundreds of millions. We did it to keep our children grounded, to see if they would love us for who we were, not what we could buy them. With my daughter Sophie, it had worked. She was a teacher, kind and brilliant. But Daniel? Daniel had been seduced by the flash, by the superficial, and he had brought Jessica into our lives like a virus. Jessica leaned in close to me, her perfume overpowering the scent of the flowers. "Look, Alara," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I know you are struggling. Next time there's a family event, come to the store. I can verify if we have anything in the damaged goods bin. I might be able to get you a discount on something that actually fits. It is the Christian thing to do." Something inside me snapped. It was a quiet snap, like a twig breaking in a deep forest, but the repercussions would be an avalanche. I looked up and met her gaze. My eyes, usually warm and crinkling with smiles, were now dry and hard as flint. "Thank you, Jessica," I said softly. My voice did not tremble. "You are very generous." She smirked, preening under the attention of her friends. "I try. God knows you need the help." The service continued, a blur of eulogies and hymns, but my mind was no longer in the church. My mind was in the boardroom. My mind was going over ledgers, personnel files, and legal contracts. As they lowered Arthur into the ground, I made him a silent promise. I promised him that I would no longer be the victim. I promised him that the legacy we built would not be squandered by wolves in cheap designer clothing. After the funeral, the reception was held at Daniel and Jessica's condo. I drove my Honda Civic, parking it down the street so it wouldn't offend Jessica's sensibilities, as she had parked her leased BMW right in the driveway. The apartment was cramped, filled with people drinking wine that was too sweet and eating hors d'oeuvres that were store-bought but plated to look homemade. Jessica was in her element, holding court in the kitchen. She had a glass of wine in one hand and was gesturing wildly with the other. "Honestly, it is a burden," she was saying to a group of Daniel's cousins. "We are going to have to support her now." Arthur left nothing. Absolutely nothing. I don't know where all his money went. Probably on medical bills or bad investments. He was never very bright with money. My blood boiled. Arthur was a financial genius who had predicted the tech boom and the housing crash. He had tripled our fortune in the last decade alone. And Alara? Jessica sighed theatrically. She is helpless. She doesn't know the first thing about the real world. I told Daniel we might have to put her in a home sooner rather than later. A state-run one, obviously. We can't afford a private facility with our lifestyle expenses. We are planning to buy a house in the hills next month, you know. I stood in the hallway, unseen, listening to her plan my demise. My daughter, Sophie, came up beside me, her face pale with anger. "Mom, did you hear that?" Sophie hissed. "I am going in there. I am going to tear her apart." I put a hand on Sophie's arm. Her muscles were tense, ready to spring. "No, Sophie." "But Mom, she is talking about putting you in a state home. She is insulting Dad." "Let her talk," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Why?" Sophie looked at me, confused by my lack of reaction. "Because, my darling, when your enemy is busy digging their own grave, you do not interrupt them to hand them a shovel. You wait until they are deep enough, and then you bury them." Sophie looked at me, and for the first time in years, she saw the woman who had negotiated hostile takeovers and stared down union bosses in the 80s. She saw the steel beneath the velvet. "Okay, Mom," Sophie whispered. "What are we going to do?" "We are going to give Jessica exactly what she wants," I said. She wants to be the star? I am going to make her the star of a show she never rehearsed for. I left the party early, claiming a headache. I drove back to my modest apartment, walked inside, and locked the door. Then, I went to the second bedroom, the one I kept locked, the one Daniel and Jessica thought was filled with old junk. I pushed aside a heavy bookshelf to reveal a wall safe. I spun the dial, left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside were the deeds, the stock certificates, the offshore accounts, and the ownership papers for Vance and Sterling. I pulled out a specific file. It was the personnel file for Jessica Thorne, employee ID 89402. I sat at my small kitchen table, pouring myself a glass of vintage Bordeaux that cost more than Jessica's monthly salary, and I began to read. Her file was a litany of mediocrity, tardiness, customer complaints, a warning for attitude. She was an average employee with a superior complex. I picked up my encrypted phone, the one I used only for high-level business, and dialed a number. "Margaret?" I said when the voice answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Vance?" "Oh, my deepest condolences. I was so sorry to hear about Arthur. How are you holding up?" Margaret was my vice president of operations, a woman who had been with me for 20 years. She knew the secret. She knew everything. "I am grieving, Margaret, but I am also working. I need you to arrange a site visit for the flagship store downtown." "Of course. When would you like to go? Next month?" "No," I said. "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow? But Mrs. Vance, the funeral was just today. Arthur would want me to keep busy." "And Margaret? I need you to pull the security tapes for the last 3 months for the sales floor, specifically focusing on Jessica Thorne." There was a pause on the line. Margaret was sharp. She connected the dots instantly. "Is there a problem with the staff, ma'am? There is a cancer in the company, Margaret, and I am going to cut it out. But first, I need to see how deep the rot goes. I want a full financial audit of Daniel and Jessica's household as well. I want to know every debt, every loan, every credit card swipe. Consider it done." I hung up the phone and stared out the window at the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. Jessica wanted to teach me about fashion. She wanted to lecture me on class. Fine. I was about to give her a master class in power. The next morning, I did not dress in my usual grandmotherly attire. I did not wear the polyester slacks or the comfortable cardigans. I went to the back of my closet to the garment bags that had not been opened in years. I pulled out a Chanel suit, vintage, impeccably tailored in a shade of charcoal gray that commanded authority. I put on my pearls, South Sea pearls, each one the size of a marble and worth a small fortune. I slipped into my Italian leather pumps. I looked in the mirror. The grieving widow was gone. The CEO had returned. I drove my Honda Civic to a private garage downtown where I kept my other cars. I parked the Honda and walked over to the silver Bentley Continental GT that was kept polished and ready. The engine purred like a waking tiger as I started it. I drove to the Vance and Sterling flagship store. It was a palace of glass and steel in the heart of the magnificent mile. Doormen in livery opened the doors for the clientele. I pulled up to the curb. The valet looked at the car, then at me, and scrambled to open my door. "Welcome to Vance and Sterling, madam," he said, bowing low. I walked through the heavy glass doors, and the smell hit me, the scent of expensive leather, jasmine perfume, and money. The store was busy. Ladies who lunched were browsing the racks, sipping champagne offered by obsequious staff. I walked through the cosmetics department, ignoring the salesgirls who tried to spray me with the latest celebrity fragrance. I headed straight for the ready-to-wear section on the second floor. That was Jessica's domain. I saw her immediately. She was leaning against a display of cashmere scarves, talking on her cell phone. She was ignoring a customer, a young woman who looked uncertainly at a price tag. "No, seriously," Jessica was saying loudly into the phone. She actually cried. It was pathetic. "I mean, get a grip, old woman. He's dead. Move on. And the food? Don't get me started. Frozen quiche. I swear, being poor must be a disease." I felt a cold fury settle in my stomach. She was talking about me. She was talking about my husband's funeral in my store while on the clock. I approached the young customer she was ignoring. The girl looked up, startled. "Can I help you, my dear?" I asked, my voice warm. "Oh, I was just looking at this scarf for my mom's birthday," the girl said shyly, "but I think it's too expensive. I don't want to bother anyone." "Nonsense," I said. "Let's look at it." I took the scarf from the rack. It was beautiful, a deep crimson silk. "Hey, you can't just touch the merchandise if you aren't buying." Jessica's voice barked out. She had finally hung up the phone and noticed me. She didn't recognize me at first. The suit, the hair, the posture, it threw her off. Then recognition dawned. Her eyes widened, then narrowed into slits of suspicion. "Alara, what are you doing here? And where did you get those clothes? Did you steal them?" I turned to her slowly. "Good morning, Jessica. I am helping this young lady, since you seemed occupied with your phone call." Jessica marched over, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. "You don't work here, Alara. You can't just help customers. And seriously, is that a knockoff Chanel? It looks decent, actually. Did you find it at a thrift store?" I ignored her question. This young lady is looking for a gift. Jessica looked at the girl, scanning her outfit, jeans and a simple sweater, and dismissed her with a sneer. "Look, honey, this scarf is $300. The clearance rack is in the basement. That's more your speed. And Alara, stop pretending you belong here. You are embarrassing me again." The young girl flushed scarlet and put the scarf down. "I am so sorry," she whispered, turning to leave. "Wait," I said firmly. I reached out and took the girl's hand. "You do not have to leave." Jessica rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Alara, stop making a scene. Go home. Go knit something. I have real clients to attend to. Specifically, Mrs. Vandermeer is coming in at noon and I need to prepare. She actually has money. Is that how we treat people here?" I asked, my voice rising slightly, enough to carry. "We judge them by their shoes. We dismiss them if they don't look like walking bank accounts." Jessica laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "It's called business, Alara. Something you wouldn't understand. We are a luxury brand. We sell an image. We don't want riffraff cluttering up the floor. It devalues the brand." "Riffraff," I repeated. "Like your mother-in-law?" "Exactly," she spat. "Look, I don't know who you borrowed that suit from, but you need to leave. Now, before I call security." "Call them," I said, crossing my arms. Jessica pulled out her radio. "Security to the second floor. We have a disturbance." An elderly woman refusing to leave. I waited. A few moments later, 2 large security guards arrived. Behind them, looking breathless and terrified, was the store manager, Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable had seen me on the cameras. She knew exactly who was standing in the scarf department. "Remove her," Jessica commanded, pointing at me. "She is harassing the clientele." The guards looked at me, then at Mrs. Gable. They didn't move. Mrs. Gable stepped forward, her face pale. "Jessica, stop." "What?" Jessica looked annoyed. "Just throw her out. She's my mother-in-law. She's senile." Mrs. Gable ignored her and bowed her head to me. "Mrs. Vance, I am so terribly sorry. I didn't know you were coming in today." Jessica froze. She looked from Mrs. Gable to me, confusion wrinkling her forehead. "Mrs. Vance? Yeah, that's her name." "So what?" Gable turned to Jessica, her eyes wide with panic. "Jessica, shut up. This is Mrs. Alara Vance, the owner." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. Jessica blinked. "Once? Twice? Owner?" she stammered. "Owner of what? The car?" "The store, Jessica," I said softly. "The company, the building, all of it." Jessica let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. That's a good joke." "Alara, seriously, did you hit your head? You live in a rent-controlled apartment. You drive a Honda. It is called humility, Jessica. Look it up." I gestured to the store around us. "My husband and I built this. Every tile, every fixture, every contract. We chose to live quietly because we valued substance over show, something you clearly know nothing about." Jessica's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. No, that's impossible. Daniel would have told me. Daniel doesn't know, I said, because I didn't want him to be targeted by gold diggers. It seems my instincts were correct, even if my protection failed. I turned to Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable, do we have the sales reports and the personnel files I requested? Yes, madam. They are in your office. My office? Jessica whispered. The penthouse office, Jessica. The one you thought was just for storage. I looked at the security guards. Gentlemen, please escort Ms. Thorne to the executive suite. We have a performance review to conduct. I turned back to the young girl who was still standing there, watching with wide eyes. My dear, please accept that scarf as a gift from the house, and my apologies for the rudeness you endured. Mrs. Gable will wrap it for you. Thank you, the girl whispered. I walked to the elevator. The clicking of my heels, the only sound in the stunned silence of the department store. In the executive office, I sat behind the massive oak desk that Arthur had used for decades. I placed the personnel file on the desk. Jessica sat in the chair opposite me, shrinking into herself. She looked smaller now, stripped of her arrogance. So, I began opening the file. Let's review your career at Vance and Sterling. Jessica started to cry. It was a practiced cry, pretty and delicate. Alara, please. I didn't know. If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me with respect, I interrupted. Is that it? Well, yes. No. I respect you. Stop lying, Jessica. It insults my intelligence. You treated me like garbage because you thought I had no power. That is the truest measure of a person's character. How they treat those they believe are beneath them. I pulled out a stack of papers. Margaret entered the room, placing a tablet on the desk. Here are the security logs, Mrs. Vance, Margaret said, glaring at Jessica. Thank you, Margaret. I tapped the screen. Here we have you mocking a customer's wait on Tuesday. Here you are on Wednesday, hiding in the break room for 2 hours while your colleagues worked the floor. And here, I played a clip. It was audio from the store's system. It was Jessica's voice, clear as day. I can't wait until the old hag kicks the bucket, too. Maybe she has some hidden jewelry we can pawn. Daniel is such a spineless idiot, I can make him do whatever I want. Jessica gasped. That was taken out of context. I paused the recording. Context? You are wishing for my death so you can pawn my jewelry? You call my son, your husband, a spineless idiot? Alara, I was just venting. I love Daniel. You love his potential inheritance, I corrected. Which brings me to the next point. Your finances. I slid a credit report across the desk. You are drowning, Jessica. $60,000 in credit card debt, a lease on a BMW you can't afford, and you applied for a mortgage on a house in the hills stating your income is triple what it actually is. That is bank fraud, by the way. Jessica was trembling violently now. How did you get that? I own the company. I have resources you cannot imagine. You have been living a lie, trying to impress people who do not care about you, using money you do not have. I can fix it. Please, Alara, don't fire me. We need the money. You are not just fired, Jessica. You are blacklisted. I will ensure that no reputable luxury retailer in this city ever hires you again. You are a liability. You are cruel, lazy, and dishonest. Please, Daniel will leave me. If he has any sense, yes, he will, but that is up to him. Security, I called out. The guards entered. Escort Miss Thorne from the building. She is to take nothing but her purse. Her locker will be cleared out and shipped to her home address. Alara, Mom, you can't do this. We are family, Jessica screamed as the guards took her by the arms. You stopped being family the moment you humiliated my husband's memory, I said coldly. Goodbye, Jessica. She was dragged out, screaming and crying, a stark contrast to the imperious woman who had stood in the church the day before. I sat alone in the office for a long time, staring at the empty chair. I felt no joy, only a hollow ache. I had cut out the cancer, but the wound was still fresh. I picked up the phone. Get me Daniel. My son arrived an hour later. He looked disheveled, confused. He saw me sitting behind the desk, the view of the city sprawling behind me, and he stopped in the doorway. Mom? What is this place? Why is Jessica calling me screaming that you ruined her life? Why are you wearing that suit? Sit down, Daniel. He sat. I told him everything. I told him about the business, the money, the reason Arthur and I kept it secret. I showed him the security tapes. I played him the audio recording of his wife calling him a spineless idiot. I watched as my son's world crumbled. I watched the denial, then the shock, then the heartbreak. She really said that? Daniel whispered. Tears streaming down his face. She did. I thought she loved me. I thought she was just high maintenance. I didn't know she was cruel. You didn't want to know, Daniel. You let her steamroll you because it was easier than standing up to her. You let her insult your mother because you were afraid of her temper. That is not love. That is hostage-taking. Daniel put his head in his hands. I am so sorry, Mom. God, I am so sorry. At Dad's funeral, I should have stopped her. I was a coward. Yes, you were, I said. I did not sugarcoat it. Arthur raised you to be better than that. I know. Daniel looked up, his eyes filled with a new resolve. I don't want this life anymore. I don't want the debt, the pretense, the constant feeling that I am not enough. Then end it, I said. That evening, Daniel went home. I did not go with him. He needed to do this alone. He packed his bags. When Jessica came home, hysterical, trying to spin a web of lies about how I had attacked her, Daniel simply handed her the divorce papers. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just left. He moved into my spare bedroom that night. For the first time in years, we ate dinner together in peace. The divorce was messy. Jessica fought for everything, demanding half of the fortune she now knew existed. But she had signed a prenuptial agreement, something Arthur had insisted on, stating that any inheritance or family business assets were protected. She left with nothing but her debt and her designer clothes. 6 months passed. The boutique was thriving under new management. Mrs. Gable had promoted the young girl who had been kind to me. It turned out she had applied for a job the week after the incident. I sat in my office reviewing the quarterly numbers. The door opened and Daniel walked in. He was wearing a simple blue shirt and slacks. He looked tired, but happy. He had been working in the warehouse, learning the logistics side of the business from the ground up. I had told him that if he wanted to be part of the legacy, he had to earn it. No handouts. Hey, Mom, he said, placing a file on my desk. We optimized the shipping routes, saved us about 12% on fuel costs. Excellent work, Daniel. Arthur would be proud. He smiled, looking at the photo of his father on my desk. I think about him every day. Me too. You know, Daniel said, sitting on the edge of the desk. I ran into Jessica yesterday. Oh? I paused, my pen hovering over the paper. She is working at a diner in the suburbs. She looked different. Humble, maybe. She tried to talk to me, tried to apologize again. And what did you say? I told her that I forgave her, Daniel said. But I also told her that forgiveness doesn't mean access. I wished her luck and walked away. I nodded, feeling a swell of pride. You did the right thing. I learned from the best, he said, squeezing my hand. I looked out the window at the city Arthur and I had loved so much. We had built a fortune, yes, but in the end, the money was just paper. The real wealth was the truth. It was the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and like who you saw. It was the strength to stand up for dignity, even when you were standing alone in a cheap black dress. Jessica had taught us all a lesson, unintentionally. She taught us that a velvet facade can hide a rotten interior, but true quality, of fabric and of soul, needs no label to prove its worth. I closed the ledger. Come on, Daniel, I said. Let's go get some dinner. I know a place that serves terrible wine but the best burgers in the city, and I'm buying. We walked out of the office, leaving the lights of the Empire burning behind us, stepping into the cool night air, finally, truly free.